All right. Well, we tried to go live and record an episode of, not an episode, just we tried to go live and show how to set up Rails with React. And I didn't realize that my audio was not even turned on. And last week, I tried to do a screen share and I was only sharing my face. So this totally happens. Okay. So this is like 2 weeks in a row where I've made huge flubs with live streaming, but you know what? It's live and that's what happens. And yeah, so we're going to try again, but this time we're going to try it for reals. And the goal of today's sort of stream is to build a super simple page just like this with Rails, where when you click buy, you're redirected to checkout to pay for something with Stripe. John, my buddy John, jumped on and he was like, hey, there's no audio for the last one. So we are going to have audio this time. Okay, so we're going to start from scratch. If you are following along in the comments, I'm going to post a link to the guide that I've sort of followed to set up React with Rails. So there is a link to the guide. I'm going to also not forget to share my screen. So here's my screen. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start from a brand new Rails application, and we're going to work our way up to having a Rails app with React installed, and then we're going to use that to redirect to checkout on the client. Yeah, so let's get after it. So we're going to say Rails new office hours Rails React -t to skip tests. -- database is PostgreSQL. That's just the flavor of database that I prefer. Rails also supports like SQLite 3, MySQL, a whole bunch of other plugin or database management systems. I'm using Webpack is equal to React, and that's going to set up some of the Webpack stuff for us, and that will handle like Webpacker install for us by default. And I'm saying skip listen because I've had issues with it in some Unix environments. And then finally, skip turbo links because turbo links also mess around a lot with our JavaScript that we write on the front end. So this is how I generally scaffold a Rails application. It takes a minute or two to get going, but that's what's happening. So what we're going to do is our Rails app is going to be pretty simple. The backend is just going to have one controller to start. It'll be a static pages controller, and it's just going to render some HTML. And then we're going to like move around some JavaScript files, create some new files, get React working on the front end, and then we will install Stripe.js. We're going to use React Router DOM on the front end for our client-side routing. But this is really kind of just to show like how generally we might set up React with Rails. All right, so the first thing I want to do is open up gem file and add Stripe, the Stripe Ruby gem. I'm also going to add annotate and pry Rails to the gem file. Okay, cool. So we are installing some dependencies. The next thing I'm going to do is set up my stripe.rb initializer, where I say stripe.api key is equal to my Rails credentials. I can say editor is vi Rails credentials edit to set up some credentials using the Rails credentials management. Okay, those are my API keys. We've got Stripe is at the top level, secret key, public key, and a webhook secret. All right, so our credentials have been encrypted. We've got our API keys installed. We've got Stripe installed. We also want to go to yarn add React Stripe.js and Stripe.js. We also want to yarn add React Router DOM. Okay. And then we can probably fire this up. Rails S or Rails server. This will start the server. We come back over here and refresh localhost. 3000, yay, you're on Rails. Super cool. Okay. I'm going to edit routes.rb and add a route to, actually, yeah, we need a controller, Rails G controller static pages route. Cool. So that's gonna, this static pages controller is gonna be sort of our root controller for the HTML that's served from the backend. Every other controller that we build on the backend will be an API only controller, just for like creating the checkout session objects. Otherwise, we're just going to be sending back this HTML, and then we're going to use React and mount React directly into this sort of standard HTML here. Do I not have a gem installed? What's going on here? Sometimes I have issues with Spring. I don't know what's up with it, but sometimes commands like this will just hang and I don't get any feedback. I'm not sure what the answer is or why that happens, but yeah, if you know what's going on there, I would love to hear. So if you want to leave just a comment below, or hit me up on Twitter, that would be sweet. So that's kind of hanging. And if after I've like removed the Spring, yeah, so once I remove the Spring gem, it just it works. I don't know what's up. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go into our JavaScript directory and change the name of our pack to index. Okay, and then we want to add routes, and we want to add components. Okay, and then in our components, we need an app JSX and maybe a home.jsx and a heybtn.jsx. In our routes, we'll have index.jsx. So so in application HTML ERB, we're going to use the JavaScript pack tag for index, and that should load our index.jsx pack. And in the index.jsx pack, we're going to mount, or we're going to render our app component. And our app component is going to be defined in components app.jsx. Okay, and then in components app.jsx, we want to import React from React, and we're going to export default props, and this is actually just going to be routes, which we're going to import routes from routes/index.jsx. Okay, and then in our routes, we're going to use like the React router DOM stuff. So let me remember what that looks like. Let's see. So browser router as router route switch from React router DOM. And then I think we say like export default, and it looks something like this: router switch. And then in here we have a route where the path is exactly / and the component that's rendered when we hit the route, the root route is the home component, which we're going to import home from components /home. Okay. And this doesn't actually have anything in it yet. So import React from React. And then we're going to say export default. Let's see. Hi, React. in the root, in the static pages root HTML, I'm going to just delete all the content because we don't actually want any content there. Let's see what's going on here. Rails S. So I'm restarting the server. Okay. So server is fired up. Refresh the page. Yay, you're on Rails. That's not the route that I want though. Routes. Okay, so root to static pages root. So when the root route is hit, so when we receive a get request for slash, it should render the static pages root page. And then otherwise, I'm going to say if we get any other requests for anything, go to static pages root. So if I don't know about the path that's being requested, I'm putting this at the very bottom. If I don't know about the request the path that's being requested, I want to render the root page so that it's populated with, or we're mounting our React app and using the client side routing for that. So if we refresh the page here, we should see possibly maybe some React stuff. Okay, we've got an error. That's cool. React is not defined in routes index. Cool. Routes index import React from React. Okay, refresh the page. Cool, we've got hi React. That's great. All right, so now in our pay button function or a pay button component, let's go implement that. So we're going to say hi React. Instead of hi React, we'll say like, I don't know, pay $5 or something. Or maybe like, yeah, buy me a coffee. That seems pretty common. A BTN. So we're going to import that component. Okay. And then here we're going to say import React. And then export default. And this is going to be a function component. And inside of here, what are we going to do? We're going to say return a button, which when it's clicked, we're going to say handle click. And it's just going to say like pay. Okay. Define that click handler. All right, so by default, we want to prevent default. By default, we want to prevent default. Eat up prevent default. Okay. Console.log clicked. Cool. Right, just to make sure that we're wiring stuff up right. So we'll refresh the page. We should see a button that says pay whatever. And we don't. Handle click is not defined. Handle, I didn't spell it right. Handle click. Again. All right, we've got a button. When we click it, we see clicked in the console. That's cool. So, all right, so in this click handler, what we want to do is create a checkout session on the server. And then we want to redirect to checkout on the client or on the front end. So what I'm going to do is create a new controller. I'm going to call it API v1 check, or like maybe payments. And this is going to create a namespaced controller in the API v1 payments, or the API v1 namespace. And it will be just a standard Rails controller that deals in transacts in JSON, traffics in JSON. Okay, so here we're going to say we're just going to have a create method that will create our checkout session. So we're going to say like a session is Stripe checkout session.create. And in here we need a mode, payment method types, a success URL, cancel URL, and line items. Okay, so the mode in this case is going to be payment. This could be subscription, setup, or payment. Payment is for one-time payment. Payment method types is the list of payment method types you want to accept. So it could be card, it could be ideal, it could be Shiro Pay, it could be SEPA debit, it could be like a whole bunch of different payment method types. Success URL, we want to come back to this page /root. Rails can be a little tricky to figure out what that is. So what I'm going to just do is root URL. Is that a helper? Maybe, I don't know. Root URL, let's just see. And then line items is an array of objects or an array of nested hashes where each item in the hash is an item that will be displayed in checkout. So here we want to say like quantity is 1, and we could specify a price here. Price is the ID of a price. So let's go create with the Stripe CLI. I'm going to create some prices. So I'm going to say Stripe prices create, or actually, yeah. So Stripe products create, name is coffee, and this will create a product on my account. And I'm going to copy that name and say Stripe prices create for that product. I want to create a price whose unit amount is 5 euros, and the currency is euros. And what else do we want here? I think that should be good because it's not recurring. It's just a one-time price. So that should be enough for us. So I take that price ID, and that's what I want to pass in here under price. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can use price data as an alternative if you're kind of like building ad hoc on the fly prices, but I am going to specify this directly as a price object. Okay, so I think this might create our checkout section as expected. And you know what I'm just gonna like render JSON of that entire session back to the client. I'm also going to disable CSRF protection. I'm kind of being a little bit willy-nilly here, but let's see. So skip before filter, yeah. Verify authenticity token. All right, I got to go to routes and make sure that we can hit this. So we say namespace API do, and then namespace v1 do, and then resources payments only create. So this should create a mapping between the like post to /API v1 payments, which when hit should create a checkout session using our API key set in the initializer and should render the JSON back for that session. So let's give it a whirl from the command line. So if I just say curl localhost 3000 /API v1 payments, that should create a checkout session. See what we get back. It did not. What did we get? It looks like we got the root back. So, oh, because we didn't send a post request. -x post. Because it does not know about how to make a get. All right, so we got some error. That's good. Undefined method skip before filter. It's probably skip before action. I always mix those up. Okay, cool. So this is our checkout session that we got back, and this is the ID that we want. We're going to use this ID to redirect to checkout. So I'm going to go back to my front end here and go back to my payment button. And so here I want to say, make a post request to API v1 payments. And we don't have any data we're passing back, but theoretically you could pass any data that helps construct the checkout session, or configure the checkout session or whatever. And then when we get the response, I'm actually gonna use await here. Checkout session equals await this thing. Okay, so once we've got the checkout session, we can say stripe.redirect to checkout, and we pass in the session ID is equal to checkout session.id. All right, so this theoretically should work, but we have not initialized Stripe.js yet. So let's see, import load Stripe from @Stripe Stripe.js. Const Stripe is equal to load Stripe, and I pass in my publishable key. All right. So note that you want to do this load Stripe bit before or like outside of your render. So like if your component is constantly rendering and you keep calling load Stripe, that's bad. You want to load it just one time so that it's set, ready to go, and then you can call it elsewhere. So I'm going to refresh the page. I doubt that I got this perfectly right the first time. So let's see what errors we're going to run into. I'm going to add some breakpoints here so we can play around. So we're in our handle click function. Cool. Let's see. All right. We got a checkout session created. It has an ID. Wow. Okay. Is this the ID? That is the ID. Wow. Redirect to checkout is not a function. Okay. So looking at the integration builder here, wait, redirect, stripe.redirect to checkout. Okay. Yeah, so this is going to return a promise. Const result is equal to await. Did I get the spelling right? Redirect to checkout. Okay, let's give it a whirl. Here. Also, we should probably check to make sure that Stripe is actually in set up, right? Stripe.redirect to checkout is not a function. Okay, how is Stripe being set up here? Load Stripe. Oh, Stripe promise. Okay. Got it. Okay. So Stripe, this should be Stripe promise. Stripe promise. And we need that to resolve. Yeah, so we can do that here. So we can say like const Stripe is equal to await Stripe promise inside of the handle click function. Okay. Because load Stripe returns a promise, we were trying to call redirect to checkout on the promise rather than like the actual object that the promise was resolved with. So if we click pay, now we should actually redirect to checkout, and we do. And this is the checkout session. It's branded. This is kind of like our colors. We can enter an email address here. You can see like a bunch of different payment method types. This is super cool. If you wanted, someone could pay you for a coffee with Ideal or ShiroPay or SEPA debit or whatever. The one limitation is that the payment method type has to match the currency. So if you're selling in, rupees or pounds or dollars or Canadian dollars or whatever, it's going to be a little different which payment method types are supported. So yeah, let's just pay with Ideal here. Test, click pay. We should be redirected back, hopefully to our root page after we have successfully authorized this payment. So now we are redirected back. Okay, so we could go to our, that's kind of what the front end would look like, right? Maybe you instead of redirecting just back to the root, you might redirect back to a specific page. Like this success URL could be like the thank you page. And the cancel URL is just where people would bail back out to. So wherever you're redirecting the thank you page, that's cool. The checkout session create takes a ton of different parameters. So you can pass in a lot to configure the checkout session here if you wanted. I've got a couple more minutes, so why don't we create also the webhooks controller. So Rails-G controller webhooks, and this will be where we receive webhooks. The really important webhook that we want to listen for with checkout is the checkout session completed event. So I'm going to go to my webhooks controller here, add a create method, and I'm just going to copy the build the webhooks code for Ruby is here. I will just grab this bit and Okay, so we're going to read the request body, the raw body, right? We want the most raw version of the body so that when we do signature verification, we're verifying based on the raw payload. The signature that's in the request header sent by Stripe, which is used to check and verify the request body payload hasn't changed with your webhook signing secret, depends on that payload not changing. So if you have some middleware installed or some gems that are installed that are modifying the request, that's why you want to use like the most raw version rather than just like params or something. So the endpoint secret in our case is being stored in Stripe webhook secret. And when we call Stripe webhook construct event with the payload, signature header, and endpoint secret, that will deserialize the webhook event, the event data posted from Stripe to us, and it will also check that the signatures are valid, and it'll verify those. I'm going to say message is E, status is 400. If we respond with anything other than a 200 HTTP status code here, then Stripe will consider that a failure, like a webhook endpoint failure, and it will retry the webhook with exponential backoff. This includes redirect. So if your webhook endpoint changes and you are sending like a 301 or 302, those are considered failures. And the Stripe webhook post will not follow those redirects. So you'll need to fix that up. So if event.type is equal to checkout.session.completed, then what we want to do is puts like checkout complete. Enjoy that coffee. All right. Need to use the same kind of quotes. I don't know why I'm mixing and matching. That's all right. And then in all other cases, other than those error cases, we're just going to render back to Stripe some JSON that says success, and we should be good to go. All right, so with the Stripe CLI, we can use Stripe listen -- to localhost 3000/webhooks. This will create a direct connection between Stripe and my local machine, and when events happen on my Stripe account, they will be delivered to my machine and forwarded to this local webhook endpoint. So if we go back to the front end here, click on pay, and walk through the checkout process, if we enter in just like, actually, let me show you what it looks like with an SCA card. This is like the Secure Customer Authentication Test Card for Europe. It shows you kind of like what the SCA flow is. So in Europe, when you click on pay, in some cases, your issuing bank will require like sort of like a 2FA, like a two-factor auth. It's very similar to that, where you would have to like enter in a one-time PIN or authenticate with your bank or what have you. And so by completing that authentication, you that's all like handled by Stripe, but a modal will be popped up and the customer will have to walk through this authentication flow, all handled by checkout for you. Super cool. So we're again redirected back here. We can go to the dashboard. So I can show you that these were like a couple of successful payments here. So let me pull up my demo account and go to test data and payments, and we should have some successful payments here at the top. So these were for the coffee that we just paid for moments ago, $5, pretty sweet. So yeah, so this is redirecting to checkout with React and Rails. In a future episode, we will do accepting a one-time payment with React, Stripe.js elements, and React. So hopefully this was helpful. This was in specific response to a tweet that I got. So hopefully Chris, I think, let's see. Let me try to find the tweet and I can share it with you. Looking here. Chris Sanchez was like, what did he say? Chris Sanchez is in the 100 Days of Code challenge here. And here he says, day 10, still wrestling with Stripe API on my Rails backend and React front end. If you help newbies, I would appreciate it. So yeah, hopefully, Chris, I'm really hopeful this was helpful. If I think we talked about it, and you were using checkout. If you were using Elements, which is where you're building your own custom form, that's a little different. And so we will we'll show a demo with Stripe Elements, but you can also check out the integration builder. If you're building a custom payment flow, you would click on custom payment flow. Pre-built checkout page is like the Stripe hosted page that you just saw that had the branded background. So this page here is the branded page. This is the branded page, and this is what the branded page looks like. This is a Stripe hosted page, and it requires those two things: creating a checkout session on the server, redirecting on the client. Separately, if you wanted to use Elements, that's where you build your own custom form element with these controls. So Stripe Elements is a set of controls that you can use to build your own custom forms. Elements are a little bit more work. You have to implement each of the payment methods individually. You have to like kind of make sure that you're doing all the error handling correctly. But with Stripe Elements, there are some components that help you with that. But again, with checkout, this is all kind of like pre-built for you, and you mostly just make sure that you're redirecting to checkout with the correct configuration. So I think I'm going to leave it there. And yeah, would love to hear any feedback you have. And yeah, love hacking on these things, little projects and little demos. So yeah, stay tuned for more stuff. I think maybe we'll do a couple more React and maybe some Vue, maybe a little bit of Angular. But yeah, really enjoying hanging out and playing in the Rails ecosystem lately. All right. Bye, friends.